Number 32, Elston Howard.
Elston Howard is one of the most important Yankees there ever was.
He was the first African-American to play for the Yankees, and that mattered.
Well, Elston Howard, had he been on any other ball club, would have been a Hall of Famer just immediately.
He knew what he had to do. He went out and he did it.
He was good at everything he did. He had a good arm, he was a good receiver, and he was a good hitter.
Whenever they put him in, he was always there to make the clutch hit.
And Ellie really tagged that one.
People in the game know who the great ones are. He was one of the greats.
Beyond the fact that he was an outstanding catcher, Elston Howard was also a pioneer, the first African-American to wear the pinstripes, and eventually the first black coach in American League history. Hi, I'm John Sterling for the Yes Network, and this is Yankeeography. In his own quiet, classy way, Elston Howard was a dynamic instrument of change, one who touched the lives of so many along the way.
Ellie was, to my eyes and my experience, as good a human being as you'll ever come across.
I hate to talk about this and refer to it that way, but he's one person I really miss today. I mean, I just enjoy being around, and the qualities of this young man were just unbelievable.
Had I had a boy, I would want him to be like Elston Howard.
He'd do anything for you, and I would do anything for him, too. I'm glad I played with him.
I always remember what he did and what he had endured in his own life and how he handled the pinstripe and the pride of being a New York Yankee. And there's only good things that you can say about Elston Howard.
Some remember him as a coach, many as a player. But everyone who knew Elston Howard remembers him fondly, both for his impact on their lives and the game itself.
I think Elston Howard is one of the most important Yankees there ever was.
If you look at the Yankee roster over the years, and they bring in Japanese players and Latin players, and he was the pioneer. He was the first one.
There was a point in time when Elston was first breaking in with the Yankees, and he ran into Jackie Robinson at a function or something, and he thanked Jackie for doing what Jackie did. Jackie said, "You don't have to thank me. Believe me, what you're doing is a lot tougher than what I had to do." And Elston looked at him quizzically, and he said, "I don't understand. How can you say that?" And Jackie's response was, "Because the Dodgers wanted me."
Here's how Elston saw it at the time.
I was frightened by the publicity I got. The first Negro player on the Yankee club. That's what they said I was going to be.
It's tough playing alone, you know. I just wish that the kids today will realize what we went through. You know, they just don't know. They just don't know.
I think all of baseball had a special feeling about Elston. Anybody that knew him, and even those who didn't, those who were on the periphery, had the impression that this was a thinking ball player.
To me, he was a great player. He could play first base, outfield, and he was a hell of a catcher.
He had the tools. He had the tools, and he wanted to win.
Elston's contributions as a coach and his accomplishments as a player is one thing. His interaction with others in such tenuous times and the road he helped pave is quite another.
Elston Howard is his own record. He's always carrying a little bit more than anybody else. Like Jackie Robinson, like Larry Doby, like all the early African-American pioneers in baseball. They not only did a job which we know is the hardest in all of professional sports to do, but they carried with them responsibilities and distractions that make their accomplishments all the more important and remarkable.
I never felt like I had it made. I always try to play like I haven't got there yet. It's been one long battle for me. As I look back over the years, I can see where I've earned whatever I got. Nobody walked up to me and gave me anything. I'm really more proud of that. I'm more proud of trying than I am of anything.
Elston Howard had that mature dignity that they looked for, something that went back to really the Joe McCarthy era, when a style was set for the Yankees of how a Yankee presents himself.
You hear a lot about the Yankee spirit and the Yankee way. Believe me, it is not exaggerated.
They needed a player like Elston Howard, and they wanted somebody to fill the Yankee persona, and that was Elston Howard himself.
I don't know where to begin. I'm very fortunate to be with the Yankees. This is the greatest thing in my life.
Long before he was a Yankee, Elston Howard grew up in a section of St. Louis called Compton Hill. It was there he first gained his reputation as a great athlete.
A four-letter man. He excelled in all the sports: football, basketball, track, and then, of course, baseball.
He was one of the great athletes of Missouri history. In fact, if you look in the Missouri Hall of Fame, I think he is still listed as the shot put champion.
In 1948, after graduating from high school, and 1 year after Jackie Robinson broke the game's color barrier, Elston tried out for the St. Louis Cardinals.
In those days, the major league teams used to have regular tryouts for just anybody that wanted to, and he tried out for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was really the best one to try out, and they said, we'll be in touch with you.
But the call never came, and Elston had no choice but to play for the class of the Negro Leagues, the Kansas City Monarchs.
I guess you could compare them with the New York Yankees. They were the premier team in the Negro Leagues at that time.
If he was a member of the Monarchs team, he was treated with royalty.
One of his managers when he went to Negro baseball was Buck O'Neill. He was also one of his mentors.
He was a catcher, but we had another catcher there, so put him in left field. Had a good arm, could run the ball down. He was a smart kid, smart, baseball smart too, and a good kid.
I remember seeing him play, and a young kid could hit that ball out of the ballpark, and that was amazing to see a little 19-year-old kid back in those days hitting that ball a long way.
Elston's time with the Monarchs yielded some wonderful memories.
It didn't matter that they were excluded from Major League Baseball, but they enjoyed what they were doing at the time. Had lots of friends there. Ernie Banks was one. He was his roommate.
He roomed us together. Yeah, Elston came to Kansas City and just had a wonderful relationship. We became real good friends, and I thought a lot of it.
The Monarchs proved to be a stepping stone to the major leagues for many a great black player, and Elston was no exception.
Tom Greenway, Scott for the Yankees, he came in to look at some of our ball players. I said, Tom, I said, the kids in left field is who you should sign. And he said, yeah, you think so? I said, look at him. You watch him. And for the, Yankees was kind of picky, They gonna pick their black ball player. You got to be more than us a player. But I say that's got to be your kid right there.
The Yankees purchased Ellie's contract, and after 3 years in the minors, they made him a catcher once again.
In 1954, he was coming to the Yankees from the Kansas City Blues. He was one of their top prospects. And then the catcher's mitt. You know, he was an outfielder then. They told him, you got to learn how to catch, and you're not coming up with the big team this year.
Ellie came up as an outfielder, but Ellie was not terribly fleet of foot, and Casey Stengel thought that he would be much better suited to be a catcher.
Said Ellie.
Bill Skiff walked over and handed me a catcher's glove. Here, he said, get used to using this. We're going to make a catcher out of you.
That spring, he began to learn how to catch, and Bill Dickey was the one who really taught him how to catch.
But the Yankees still weren't ready to bring him to New York.
So they loaned him off to the International League, and he did quite well there. He hit .331, was MVP of the league.
Again, the Yankees hesitated to make Elston their first black player. But at least he didn't have competition for that anymore.
They had a pretty good ball player named Vic Power, and he was in the organization.
There was a lot of talk at the time that Vic Power should have been the first, but it was felt that Vic was like too flashy for the Yankees. And while that was probably true, flashy didn't work black or white in the Yankees in those days.
But Power, who led the American Association with a .349 batting average in '53, was traded after that season. And that left Elston simply waiting for the call.
Now along comes Elston Howard. What are they going to think of to get rid of Elston Howard so they wouldn't have to play an African-American? And they just couldn't find a reason.
Coming up. It was 1947 when Jackie Robinson forever changed the game of baseball.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rickey. I'm certainly delighted with my contract.
It's a very major step in civil rights and in society when Jackie Robinson breaks the color line.
Jackie was, of course, the first black player in the major leagues. Larry Doby was the first in the American League, which was integrating slower than the National League. In 1955, 4 teams still had no black players, and the Yankees were one of them.
People always tell me, say, why the Yankees, it took them so long to get a black ball player. I said, well, you know, the Yankees didn't need a black ball player. They're filling up the ballpark anyway.
Of course, the spotlight was on the Yankees because they were the Yankees, the premier team. There was a lot of pressure put on from the outside because after all, New York City, you're supposed to be this liberal northeastern state, and why didn't they have any black ball players? They certainly had the opportunity.
Much of the blame was placed on general manager George Weiss, who some considered a racist.
George Weiss was quoted at a cocktail party, and this has been in print, that he said, quote, I don't want on my team because the people in Westchester, they don't want to see black players, they don't want to sit next to black fans. And that was the mentality the Yankees had.
They were doing so well and winning so much with their white players that they could say, well, you know, we can afford to get a black player who fits, meaning doesn't rock any boats.
But the Yankees had a player of that caliber in the minor leagues, and it was time for them to find him.
I guess the Yankees realized they were under pressure from the newspapers, the TV, media. So eventually the Yankees yielded to that pressure, particularly after 1954 when they didn't win the pennant. So now the door was wide open for Elston.
So in the spring of '55, Elston Howard joined the Major League team. But just because he was with the Yankees did not mean he was welcomed by all.
The Yankees used to train in St. Petersburg, but Elston and other black players in St. Pete were not allowed to stay in the white hotels. So my father, who was a physician in the community, brought them home, or he would send them to other friends' homes and, you know, let them spend the night there or a couple nights until they found decent housing for them.
I just remember his first spring training in St. Petersburg. They had black players staying in a certain part of town. They couldn't stay at the Serena Hotel with the rest of the players. And I really felt sorry for him. I just couldn't believe that how the people treated the Afro-Americans down south in those days.
But if the South and the front office saw Elston only as a black man, his teammates saw, well, a teammate.
Well, Elston's reception from the Yankees was absolutely tremendous. Everybody just reached out and wanted to be any help they could in a bad situation.
We didn't care as long as he could play. and only could do that. We took him to the movies and everything down spring training. You know, Mickey was a great friend with him. Whitey was a good friend. We came pretty close.
To us, he was a teammate of ours, and it's like Hank Bauer and Gene Woodley. When I joined the Yankees, the first thing they said to me is, don't monkey around with my money. I'm used to winning here, and you better abide by the rules. And that's the way it was with Ellie. I took him out for dinner. I said, Ellie, this is the way the Yankees are.
One time, Ellie Howard came into a restaurant, and Hank was sitting there with some of the other guys, and Ellie just wasn't sure whether being a black man in America in 1955, you know, quite what to do. And Hank Bauer called him over and said, hey, Ellie, come sit with us. You know, to Hank, he was a Yankee, he was a teammate, and that was what was important.
The friendship of the Yankees like Mantle and Ford and Berra, who was already ensconced as the catcher, were very important in just welcoming Ellie in and embracing him as part of the family, and that was genuine.
Yankees manager Casey Stengel also openly embraced Elston, despite his reputation at the time of being less than tolerant to black players.
A lot of the Casey animosity that exists comes from players like Jackie Robinson, who used to hear catcalls from the Yankee dugout saying, you know, throw that out and things like that. And, of course, Jackie took these things personally. When Elston came to the team, Casey accepted him as just another player, and that one quote got kind of blown out of proportion.
Here's what Elston had to say.
I don't think Casey ever cared about your color if you wore the Yankee uniform with pride.
There were a lot of speculation that he didn't treat Elston well, but that's really not true. He was sort of paternal to Elston. I don't think he was prejudiced at all. I think it's just a part of the era.
But a new era began on April 14th, 1955, when Elston Howard achieved his dream and became the first black man in a Yankees uniform.
I was in the Black Associated Press, which was the wire service for a lot of black newspapers. That was a bulletin that came right over the wires. You know, first Yankee plays in a game. People in Harlem were celebrating. This is it, you know. Black people couldn't root for the Yankees because they didn't have a black player. Now they did.
Finally, the color barrier had been broken on the #1 team in baseball, and by a young man named Ellie.
Elston Howard, for the New York Yankees, represents in the premier team the African-American who then has to, like Jackie, put it all on the line. How he behaves becomes much more important than how any other baseball player behaves, because he's the first African-American on the premier team.
Ellie talked to me about Jackie Robinson. He said, I could not have been that guy. I could not have gone through what Jackie Robinson went through. But in his own quiet way, Ellie also was a pioneer.
Coming up, Elston Howard made history in 1955 as the first black player on the Yankees. His next hurdle was to become the starting catcher.
Ellie was the perfect physique for a catcher. He was built, streamlined, great arm, and unfortunately, Yogi was there.
The problem with that, of course, was that Yogi Berra, who was the finest catcher in the American League, was in front of him.
Yogi is Yogi. You don't replace Yogi unless you can outplay Yogi.
But Elston never even got the chance to compete with Yogi. Thanks to his versatility, he instead found himself subject to Casey Stengel's infamous platoon system.
Unfortunately, he was a platoon-type manager, and Elston fell into that platoon system early on in his career, where he played a couple games at first base, a couple behind the plate.
Never heard him complain at all. Sitting on the bench where he would have been a star on perhaps 15 of the other 16 ball clubs, and never one word of complaint, but always ready to go in at the right time.
Elston was a real asset to us because he could play, you know, like first base, outfield, and he was a good hitter. He was a very big plus to us.
Elston's teammates appreciated his many talents, but there was one defining moment when Howard knew that he was one of them.
In his first year as a Yankee, Ellie got up late in one of the ball games and hit a home run to win the game.
Swung on with a high drive to left. Colavito going back.
It was that game-winning hit that led to a clubhouse surprise.
After the game was over, he opens the door to the locker room, and he finds towels.
Joe Collins, Mickey Mantle, they lined the towels up. It was like a red carpet laid out for me. I was surprised, and when they did that, I figured I was accepted, just like everyone else.
With the pressure off, Elston did a solid job in '55 wherever he played. He helped lead the Yankees to the World Series, where he became just the 6th man in history to do this.
In his first World Series time at bat, Howard smashes a homer to left.
Still, the Yankees lost the series, and although Elston thought his clutch play might bring an end to being platooned, he would play just about 100 games in '56 and '57.
The most frustrating thing for Elston was that he wasn't playing as much as he would have liked to or should have.
Ellie was not a person to make a fuss about anything. I'm sure he felt what everybody else felt. Why can't I play every day?
He was actually in the batting title race in '58, but did not qualify due to a lack of at-bats. The frustration only mounted.
I can hit righties as well as lefties, but how am I going to lift my average if I don't play?
Still, Elston remained silent. He helped the Yankees reach the World Series again in 1958, where he made a game-saving play.
The Yankees were down 3-1 in the '58 series, and Red Chandies hit a line drive to left field.
Elston Howard makes a spectacular diving catch.
In the fall, with the sun, had set right in the top of the roof. All the left fielders were having problems.
I never lost a ball in the sun in my life. I knew I had to get the ball. I skinned my knee and my stomach doing it.
Elston came out of nowhere, made a great diving catch, got up, threw the ball to first base, double play into rally. The Yankees go on to win the game. They went on to win the World Series, and Elston made the pivotal play of the World Series.
In turn, he became the first black man ever to win the Most Outstanding Player Award in the World Series. Buoyed by this honor, Elston decided to release his frustration and boldly stake his claim to the starting catcher's job.
One of these days, I want baseball fans to mention my name in the same breath as Yogi Berra and Roy Campanella.
Coming up next. Elston's quest to be the starting catcher finally became a reality in 1960 when he played more games than Yogi Berra. He further enhanced his position with a magnificent World Series.
Oh, he was on a tear. He had 462 in the World Series. He homered in the first game as a pinch hitter.
Deep to left field. That ball is gone. Van Ellie really tagged that one.
He was just exceptional. Unfortunately, they didn't win the series that year.
Pirates become the new baseball champions of the world.
Not even Elston's heroics could save the Yankees in that World Series, and Casey Stengel was ultimately dismissed. New manager Ralph Houck had no intention of continuing Casey's platoon system, and that bode well for Elston.
He enjoyed playing for Ralph. He really did, because they were more compatible.
And by then, Houck came to Elston and said, "You are my #1 catcher now. Yogi is still here, but you are #1."
So Elston was finally the leading man, and he filled that role with class. But in '61, everyone took a backseat to the home run record race.
In '61, of course, it was Maris and Mantle and the home run deal, and that's the way it was. He was an outstanding performer, but not a headline grabber. In fact, I remember one game, Elston hit a home run early in the ball game, and I think Maris hit a home run late in the game, and the reporters all went right by Elston's locker, went to Maris's, and the question was, now, are you going to break Babe Ruth's home run record? Nothing was said about the key hit that Elston got early in the game.
But if you look beyond the M&M boys, you'd find a man who had a most remarkable year, especially for a catcher.
You know, Ellie hit 348 in 1961. How much better could you be at the catching position?
With Elston now such an important part of the team,
the Yankees realized their spring training facility in St. Petersburg was no longer acceptable. So they sought a new home, one that would not force Elston's segregation from the team.
The Yankees were so angry that nobody would change the way things were, that in 1962 they left St. Petersburg and they moved to Fort Lauderdale, where they could get integrated housing.
Now fully unified, the Yankees proved unstoppable and returned to the World Series in '62, where once again Elston played a role.
Game 1, where Whitey Ford didn't have his curveball working, and Elston went out the second or third inning and said, look, your curveball is not working. You better just go with the fastball. They worked the hitters beautifully, and they were able to get out with a 6-2 win.
After winning that World Series, the Yankees looked to Elston to carry the offense in '63, for much of their usual firepower was on the shelf.
The M&M boys were hurt. They were out. They missed a whole bunch of games that season. And Elston carried the team. He carried the team on his back to the pennant that year.
Ellie did everything that year very good. He was outstanding, no question about it. He became a leader as far as how to handle pitching, and he was throwing real good at the time and hitting good. He did everything good. It was just one of those years that the player has, and he had it.
Elston won his first Gold Glove in '63, but a prize of historic proportions overshadowed even that.
Ellie, of course, became the most valuable player in the American League in 1963. He was the first black player to become AL MVP.
Prior to that, there had been several NL winners of the Most Valuable Player Award, but Elston happened to be the first, and deservingly so for his performance.
And Elston fully understood its importance.
I just won the Nobel Prize of Baseball.
In August of '64, the Yankees held an Elston Howard night, an honor reserved for just a special few.
On that day, it was wonderful because it showed that, you really arrived.
Elston, as always, was eloquent.
I don't know where to begin. I'm very fortunate to be with the Yankees. This is the greatest thing in my life, and I want to thank each and every one of you for making this possible.
If nothing else, these honors made Elston work even harder. He helped lead the Yankees to another World Series in '64, where, unfortunately, they lost to the Cardinals in 7 games.
The Cardinals are the new world champions.
This also began the Yankees' decline, as injuries to Mantle, Maris, and eventually Howard proved too much.
He was in Puerto Rico. He made a throw, kind of slipped on some mud behind home plate and kind of threw his elbow out of joint. Needed surgery, and he just never was the same player after that.
My arm isn't right. It's sore. It hurts here in the elbow. It hasn't been right ever since the surgery, and I can't straighten it out.
Elston was never the same after that, and for years, neither were the Yankees. But though his abilities had waned, his contributions to the game continued on. Early in the '67 season, his 13th with the Yankees, Elston Howard became an unlikely villain in the New York-Boston rivalry.
There was a pitcher for the Red Sox named Bill Rohr, and he had a no-hitter going into the 9th inning.
Tension at Yankee Stadium now as Elston Howard stands up there. The scoreboard tells the story. The pitch to Howard, hit into right field. It's a base hit. And the no-hit try is broken up.
And the fans just turned on Elston. I mean, they wanted to see a no-hitter, and Elston was dumbfounded. He'd never been booed by Yankee fans, and now they were booing him for breaking up a no-hitter.
One can only imagine then how Elston felt later in the '67 season when he was dealt to those hated Red Sox.
Everybody knew that it was the tail end of Ellie's career.
His days with the Yankees were getting to be numbered at that age.
Ralph Howe called him and said, you're traded to Boston. And of course he was dumbfounded. And he said, I'm not going.
I talked to him. I told him why we were doing it. He understood that the Boston was trying to win a pennant. and he could be a good part of it.
The Yankees were not going anywhere that particular year. Boston really wanted him because they needed an experienced catcher. And I said, you know, Boston is really a nice place. And it wasn't that far. So he decided he would go and play.
When Elston arrived at Fenway Park, Boston manager Dick Williams showed him the respect he well deserved.
I know when Dick asked me about him, I told him he knows the hitters as good as anybody in the league.
Dick Williams was the manager who told his pitchers, if you shake off Elston Howard, you're fined automatically.
But the Boston pitchers needed no such prodding, for they now had a legendary catcher to guide them, one who had already participated in 9 World Series. They
were in awe. They thought, this is Elston Howard. This is Elston Howard on our team now.
There was a calmness about him. There was an astuteness about him. He knew the game. He had studied the game, but there was a calming effect.
It was a presence that could only prove beneficial to the stable of strong young arms Boston had in 1967, especially the eventual Cy Young Award winner, Jim Lonborg.
If you look at Jim Longborg's performance, particularly in September, it was Elston who was behind the plate a lot of the times.
Imagine how it must have felt the first time Ellie played at Yankee Stadium in a Boston uniform. He was in for a surprise.
Elston was kind of nervous, but when he returned in a Red Sox uniform, he was cheered. They gave him a 2-minute standing ovation, and he felt very good about that.
Still, his allegiance was now to the Red Sox, and he even became part of Boston lore, thanks to one memorable play.
Jose Tartavel made this throw with Kinberry on third.
There's a drive into right field, caught by Tartavel, runner tags. Here's the throw home, and he is out at the plate! He is out at home!
And that ended the game, and Red Sox fans have yet to forget that play.
For Elston, it was all about the game.
Baseball is in my blood. If I can help the Red Sox win the pennant this year, it would be the greatest thrill of my career.
One thing that he brought over from his days with the Yankees was a winning attitude, and he knew what it took to win.
And Boston did, in fact, win the '67 pennant. In the series, Elston faced an old friend in Roger Maris.
This would be his 10th World Series, which is quite an achievement to play in 10 World Series.
The Cardinals won that series, much like they had when Elston was a Yankee in '64. He would play one more year in Boston, but after a dignified 14-year career, Elston, on his terms, left his beloved game.
He always said, I'll know when it's time to go, and I'm not going to stay longer than I should and embarrass myself, because it's not there anymore. It's time to go.
Coming up next on Yankeeography.
There wouldn't have been anybody on that ball club that I know of that would have objected to Elston Howard taking on the leadership of that managerial job. Nobody.
Following his brief time in Boston, Elston retired in '68, but he was soon back in pinstripes. Once again, a pioneer.
In 1969, Elston Howard was the first black coach in the American League, and that's another milestone and credit to his resume.
Well, it just seemed like a natural progression. Bill Dickey was a coach, Yogi Berra became a coach, and he was such a good baseball man, so well-liked. It just seemed natural that Elston would be a coach on the team.
In Elston's case, he was extremely popular with all the players. There wasn't a player that didn't like this guy, didn't admire him.
You know, Ellie was kind, he was compassionate. Ellie didn't say a whole lot, you know, he was kind of a quiet guy. But when he did speak, everybody wanted to hear what he had to say.
Elston was so respected that in 1973, he allowed himself the chance to dream.
There was a rumor that Ralph Houck was going to resign, and Elston heard that rumor, and he thought, wow, this could be it. This could be my chance to be Yankee manager.
There had never been a black manager in the major leagues, and at first, Elston hesitated.
You know, he was never a guy who ruffled feathers, rocked the boat, but someone probably advised him, if you want that job, tell people you want the job. Don't just sit there and wait for it to come to you. Go out and get it.
He went out and campaigned. He started talking to newspapers and TV guys, you know, saying it's time for a black manager.
I think baseball should be ready for a black manager now. There won't be any problem with the ball players. There are so many blacks in the game now. Not the way it was when I came up. Just a couple on every team.
There wouldn't have been anybody on that ball club that I know of that would have objected to Elston Howard taking over the leadership of that managerial job. Nobody.
No doubt Elston had been spurred on by the words of Jackie Robinson just before Jackie's death in '72.
I'm extremely proud and pleased to be here this afternoon. Blackface managing in baseball. Thank you very much.
But that man would not be Elston, for the Yankees chose to take quite a different path.
Instead, out of nowhere, they picked Bill Verdon, who had no connection with the Yankees other than the fact that he'd been a Yankee farmhand in 1954. And so this was a shock to Elston.
I feel badly for Ellie. He deserved his shot. He had paid his dues, was a career Yankee, was an able coach, knew the game. He should have had his shot.
Instead, it was Frank Robinson, who in 1975 became the first black manager in the major leagues. The good team man that he was, Elston overcame his personal disappointment and continued to coach, proving, in fact, to be an invaluable presence in a clubhouse that was quickly turning into a zoo.
When there would be incidents of team turmoil or clubhouse unrest, Elston would be the first person there to do something about it.
Well, I mean, if anybody can keep peace, Elston Howard could do it. You know, all he had to do is grab you by the collar and pick you up and move you on.
Ellie was a big, strong guy, and if he put his arms around you, you weren't going anywhere, and he was a peacemaker.
I guess the classic example was when Billy and Reggie got into it in Boston in the dugout, and the first person to jump in between them was Elston Howard.
When that fight broke out between Reggie and Billy, Elston stuck his nose right in the middle before it got out of hand. He was a law and order guy first.
In so many ways, Elston was a huge part of the Yankees' late '70s success when the team won back-to-back titles. He never did become the manager, but he managed very well as a coach.
Elston was a leader in a silent kind of a way. He wasn't a rah-rah guy. He was businesslike. He was professional.
His demeanor, his will to win, the imparting of knowledge to the younger players on how to play the game. And boy, was I impressed by Elston. The Yankees had a first-rate individual over there as a player and as a coach for many, many years.
The final chapter of Elston Howard's life began in 1978 when he developed a rare heart disorder, one that cruelly sapped him of his strength.
One time he went on a road trip and came home, tried to pick up the luggage. Couldn't do it. He was out of breath. And he knew something was wrong, and of course he went to see the doctors.
Well, it was diagnosed as myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle.
It was such a mysterious illness that no one had really heard anything about this or knew much about it.
He caught a virus, what they call the Coxsackie virus, which attacked the heart.
I didn't know he had that, to tell you the truth. I thought he was a big man. I thought he was healthy.
I didn't know that Ellie had a bad heart, you know. I don't know that we knew that he was that sick.
Anybody around the Yankees then all believed that somehow he'd be okay.
Though no longer strong enough to coach, Elston remained part of the Yankees family. He was given a job in the front office, to which he remarked,
I guess this move makes me the Jackie Robinson of the Yankees front office. I'll be learning all aspects of the baseball business.
It was an effort by the Yankees to make sure he stayed part of the family and knew that his presence at the game was important.
But the virus began to take over, and late in 1980, Elston entered the hospital for the final time.
They treated it for a while, but then, of course, it got progressively worse.
It was a stunning development when the word came that he was getting worse in the hospital, not better.
He was at Columbia Presbyterian, and I called Steinbrenner because the doctors had told me that we don't think there's much time left. And he said, isn't there something that we can do? But, of course, there wasn't.
I went to the hospital, actually, to see Elston. Then all of a sudden, the next day, I read that he passed away, like the next day. So it was pretty shocking to me that it happened so suddenly like that.
When the world lost Elston Howard on December 14th, 1980, it soon became clear how many lives he had touched.
It's just a real shock when you lose, one of your close friends.
It was just a tremendous loss for me. Elston Howard was a mentor. He was a big brother.
I just felt like I lost a friend, a compadre.
If you read all the obits and the columnists in the New York papers, they were very eloquent in their regards to Elston and his career and what he meant to the Yankees back then. It was a sad day.
Howard's funeral was a tribute to a great Yankee and a great man.
All the different people from all walks of life, all the ex-major leaguers that played against them, that played with them, that were there.
It's hard to feel good about anything at a time like that, but you do appreciate the outpouring.
The scope and just the whole nature of Elston's funeral was symbolic of the fact that he was a very significant Yankee.
A significant Yankee, yes, but also a historic human being.
If you talk about Yankee class, he was Yankee class. He was the pioneer. He was the first one. They wanted somebody to fill the Yankee persona, and that was Elston Howard.
As a young black player coming up with the Yankees, Elston Howard was a guy you could look at and try to emulate, the way he conducted himself and the way he carried himself on the field.
The fact that Howard came to the Yankees when they were lily white and was so good and was such an outstanding person, too, that matters. And in a way, though, it's a shame because it overshadows what was a very good ball player.
We can only wish that a man of Elston's stature, a man of such dignity and grace, could be with us for more than just 51 years.
Elston, he had a full life, but it's a shame that he died at such a young age because he had a lot more to contribute.
Not only black, any kid could look up to Elston Howard. Yeah, any kid could look up to Elston Howard. Elston still had a lot to offer, had he lived.
We still hold on to all the memories that he gave us and the great joy that we followed when he played. Just a wonderful person that you'll always remember.
That Elston Howard played such an integral role in so many championship seasons is, of course, part of his great legacy. But the fact that he broke barriers and the manner in which he did so had perhaps an even greater impact on Yankees history. Elston Howard influenced so many people, both black and white. With his intelligent, easygoing demeanor, we'll never know how many lives and perceptions he changed, or how many future generations benefited from those who got to know this truly wonderful man. For the Yes Network, I'm John Sterling, and thanks for watching Yankeeography.